Hello, this is Justin Ruger with Accessible Beekeeping and More. Today we have our guest, Fred Ayers, or sorry, Dr. Fred Ayers. You have to respect the doctor. Thank you for joining us all the way from the United Kingdom, and I would love to talk to you about your some of the things that you've done in the beekeeping community. But first, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in keeping bees?
Okay, well, I started keep excuse me. I started keeping bees in the year 2000. This was my Millennium project. Um, it's something I'd been thinking about doing for quite some time, but I finally got around to it. And I think I followed a fairly traditional approach. I joined a club. I was taught the conventional approach to beekeeping. I got my first nucleus. The following year, the nucleus divided into two, and I got another one, plus a swarm, which made three. The following year, there was six, and the following year, there was 12. And I began to think this is a lot of hard work. And I started looking into different ways of keeping bees. In particular, because I run a business at the same time, I just didn't have the time to inspect my bees every week, once a week, for the 3 or 4 months of the swarming season. So I began to look at alternative and more natural ways of keeping the bees. At the same time, um, we had in our club a number of older people who couldn't lift heavy boxes, who were having to give up beekeeping. And I thought there's got to be a different way of doing this. I also have a disabled daughter. She's not interested in beekeeping, but I could see that somebody in a wheelchair, um, using a mobility scooter, couldn't keep bees using a conventional hive. So I set to thinking about a completely different approach. And we designed a hive which was um, based, I suppose, on the Layens hive, in that it's a long hive. It holds 20 frames, not quite as deep as the Layens. Because of the climate we live in, it's also heavily insulated, because we do get fairly cold winters. And for wheelchair users or people with disabled, the most they have to lift is one frame at a time. So, quite honestly, we felt that that had gone a long way. We had a grant from an organisation in the UK called Help for Heroes, which was set up by a major charity to help disabled servicemen who were returning from the Afghan war. And most of them had leg injuries, and were confined to wheelchairs. So again, it was something we looked at so they could participate in beekeeping. And our approach basically is we inspect our bees at the beginning of the year in spring, largely to ensure the bees have come through all right and carry out comb exchange. We inspect them again in what we call June gap. I don't know whether you get the equivalent in the States, but basically we get two distinct flowering seasons. We get a springtime where we get all sorts of spring flowers. Then there's a gap of about 4 or 5 weeks before the summer flowers come out. So we tend to call that the June gap because that's about when it occurs. And we inspect them basically to take off a honey crop, because the hives are often bursting at that time. So we take it off to give them more space. And then we'll inspect again in the autumn just to make sure the bees are okay going into the winter. We let our bees swarm naturally and put a lot of swarm boxes around for them to swarm into. And I can't guarantee that it catches all the swarms, but we certainly get about 90% of the swarms. And it also means because these are normally sort of polynucleus hives that we use for that, the bees will live in them for a season if they have to. But it does mean we can collect the bees as and when we want to, rather than doing it once a week. And that's really the basis of the club. It's a very natural approach to beekeeping. We don't interfere any more than we have to. Um, and it's growing in popularity.
That's fantastic. Your so is this idea that you built with your club Is this what inspired your book, Alternative Approach to Beekeeping?
Yes, there's at the moment about 40,000 registered beekeepers in the UK. Half of them roughly are very conventional beekeepers, as they have been for the last 150 years. Methods haven't changed a great deal. And the other half, and they're very well organized. So they run training courses, they have examinations and everything else. The rest of us are normally in small groups that talk to each other but have no great structure. And this book was really to explain to conventional beekeepers the basic differences between our approach, our alternative approach, and what they're doing, so they can understand the logic. So I'm a firm believer in knowing what you do and why you do it. If you can't explain a sensible reason why you do it, don't.
And you have that published with Northern Books?
Yes, Northern Bee Books, yes.
Northern Bee Books, my apologies. So your Loon Valley beekeepers, that is your club apiary, and you're using your a special approach. Does everybody in the club use that approach, or are there some that use length hives, or is it like a regional thing, or is it just everybody does it your way, or not your way, but the way that you guys have come up with?
Almost, well, no, all our new members who are just coming and just starting beekeeping tend to follow this particular way. We have a number of people who are already keeping bees who have equipment. You can follow the approach in a conventional hive. It's the approach that's different, not particularly the hive, although it does require a bit more extra work in a conventional hive. The other thing I should say is we have to have a completely different approach to extracting honey, because we don't use foundation. We let the bees draw out their own natural comb. One of the reasons for that is that when the government has tested imported wax, a lot of it comes from China, and they seem to be very generous with their pesticides, which are sort of locked into the wax. So by letting the bees draw out their own comb, they draw the cell size that they want, they draw it in the shape that they want, but we do use frames to try and keep a little bit of order. But it does mean we can't spin the honey out, we have to press it out.
And how does your hive work with pests? Do you have varroa mites and small hive beetles and all that there in the UK?
No, fortunately, we don't have small hive beetle yet. There are a lot of precautions to try and stop us getting it. We do have varroa. We've had varroa since 1992, but we don't treat our bees at all. I haven't treated my bees since 2004, and our rationale is if you don't treat them, then they form a balance in the end with varroa. There are small amounts of varroa present, but not a great deal. It doesn't cause us a problem. Initially, the first year when you don't treat, there is a problem. Then the bees seem to find a way of coping. But we don't use any chemicals on treating our bees at all.
That's awesome. There seems to be a small war going on between treatment free and pro treatment. It's definitely interesting to hear both sides of it.
The problem with treating is you've got to continue to do it. Our government agricultural department said in about 1994 that if we didn't treat bees, we'd have no bees left within 10 years. Well, I can say in our own area, I can only speak for our own area, the number of feral bee colonies is increasing steadily. And they manage quite well without any treatment or management. So it doesn't really seem to make much sense to me. The other thing I would say is that every time I go to a bee show, there's always a new treatment. So after having varroa for 30 years, we haven't managed to cure it yet. So I'm not sure that we're going
to. So we constantly have to keep trying new things.
Well, that's expensive. It's far better just to let the bees get on with it.
and so you mentioned your hive.
Yes.
Uh, you guys, was it just you that designed it, or did you have a partner that helped you design it?
At the time, it was I had the idea, and I had a friend who was a brilliant carpenter who actually built it, and we built one and tried it, and then built another one. I was also influenced by the Russian Zamok hive, which is a huge thing. It takes frames that are about 1/2 meter square. Now the bees do very well in it, but it's extremely difficult to manage.
That's the Zamok, Zamok.
Yes, it's apparently it's Russian for palace.
Okay, and how does that work?
It,
Is it just another long hive?
it's just another long hive. It's heavily insulated. I mean, ours only has about 2 inches thick walls. This one has 6 inches thick walls. But of course, Russia's a much colder place than we are. And it holds 30 1/2 meter square frames. So it's a big hive.
That is
In
a big
fact,
hive.
with the bees we have in the UK, I split it into two, have a colony at each end, and they still had plenty of room.
How does the Zamok hive do in warmer climates?
Um, it seems to do all right in the sense that if you didn't need the insulation, I wouldn't have the cost of putting it on. But the bees, when we've had it registered and engineers measure the heat inside, it's pretty constant because the insulation stops the transfer of heat either in or out. So the bees get it to the temperature they want, and then they use far less energy keeping it warm or far less stores to do so.
You I was reading on your website, and I'm sorry I can't exactly remember, but you had a big thing about pollinators. Is there anything special you'd like to say about pollinators?
Um, hmm. Within the UK at the moment, there is a great drive to encourage people to grow more of their own food. And the local authorities are supporting that, except that nobody thought about how all this food stuff was going to get pollinated. So we've been running courses amongst the gardening fraternity to explain to them that they do need a pollinator base somewhere near where they're growing. The other thing which is affecting us at the moment is you possibly heard of Brexit, where Britain left the European Union on the 1st of January 2020. Since then, it's been illegal to import honeybees into the UK, apart from queen bees. So each year until then, about 20 to 30,000 colonies were imported each year. Now, there's a big drive on for us to breed our own bees. And that again is one of the initiatives we have at our club apiary to set up to breed our own local bees, suitable to our own local climate, because the climate in the UK does vary, whether depending on whereabouts you are. And we're in the northwest, where it's not particularly cold, but we have long, damp winters. So our bees need to be adapted to that sort of environment.
Does the long damp winter work well with the long hives? I mean, you guys are doing well, so I'm assuming it does. But the change in insulation from the 2 inches or the two, you said 2 meters.
Yeah, what we're finding is two things. One is because the bees are warmer during the winter, we tend to get brood for most of the year, whereas before there was a gap in the brood. So we need to leave more stores on over winter, which is why we don't take honey off in the autumn, which is the traditional way in the UK. And the second thing we're finding is that the bees are building up to go out and get the spring flowers a lot earlier than they did before. So it's been beneficial all around, really, as far as we can tell.
Well, thank you so much. we've talked about your long hive, and is there anything special you'd like to say about the design of that compared to anything else on the market?
It's basically a very simple design. The plans for it, if you're interested, are on our website, so you can download them and have a look, and anybody's more than welcome to do that. We're always interested in talking to beekeepers in other parts of the world as well. So we do publish a monthly newsletter which people can subscribe to through our website if they're interested, which just tells you what we're doing and why we're doing it. Apart from that, so we are interested in, we have a lot of contact in Northern Europe, but of course over there they're actually making hives out of logs, trees at the moment.
Oh, wow.
Rather than log hives, but Ziegler, the tree beekeepers, are quite popular there. But it's all interesting stuff. And again, our basic aim is anything that's relatively natural for the bees, alongside responsible management, is something we're very interested in.
And then just one last thing, you had mentioned about your daughter being in a wheelchair.
Yep.
I'm in a wheelchair myself and interested in keeping honeybees, and that's why I started this Accessible Beekeeping and More podcast and a nonprofit here in the United States. Your Loon Valley Long Hive, what can be changed to adapt to somebody with disabilities?
The hive itself doesn't need adapting. What we do say is the stand that you put the hive on can be adjusted to the right height, so that you can get the working surface about waist level, if that's, or whatever suits you in particular. And because you only have to lift for inspections one frame at a time, you don't have the heavy lifting. Because it's one box, you don't have any other parts to need apart from putting Nod's frame in or changing the frame. So it has minimal intervention, minimal work, but it's always at an accessible level. I mean, the lid is on a hinged, so you don't have to lift that. A crown board's got no weight to it. Okay, a 14 by 12 frame can be quite heavy, but we can't get around that one. So we've taken all the steps we can to make sure that a wheelchair, powered scooter, whatever, can get close enough up to the hive for somebody to comfortably reach in and lift. And it works quite well. The other thing, of course, we do have is all our hives are on a very hard surface. We use a concrete base, which we probably wouldn't have had we had able-bodied people all the time. But we do need this solid all-weather base, so people with wheels can actually get on at any time of the year or any weather conditions.
Yeah, that's what we're working on here in the States with my nonprofit, is trying to build like a prototype for accessible apiaries.
Yeah.
So that we can start building them around the country. It'll be fun.
Yes, a lot of work, but fun.
Yes, a lot of work. Well, thank you again, Dr. Fred, or Dr. Ayers, for coming on. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. If anybody wants more information, they can always email us or contact through the website. More than happy to help.
Okay, and then I'll make sure that I link to your website and to your plans in the YouTube video of our interview.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you so much for being on, and everyone, thank you for listening to our talk today. Bye.
Thank you for having me.